So first of all, thanks for inviting me to speak today. I'm quite excited to come and talk to a load of volunteer managers about volunteer data. Data is a more exciting topic than it sounds, and hopefully by the end of this conversation, everyone will agree that data is exciting and opportunistic. I'm Andrew Newman. I'm the Principal Data Specialist at the Open Data Institute. I'm also a volunteer with a scout group. I'm the treasurer for a scout group with 300 kids and about 50 volunteers. So that keeps me busy when I'm not doing my real job. So I get volunteering. I understand why it's important and why it matters. Today, I want to do a few things with the hour that we've got. First of all, I want to introduce the Open Data Institute. We're an organisation that hopefully you'll hear a bit more about over the next few months as we start to step into volunteering data with a bit more force. I want to tell you why we're interested in volunteering and tell you about our hypothesis and tell you about our planned work to prove our hypothesis. And then I'm going to be really, really brave, and I'm going to try using some interactive technology because this feels like a great opportunity for me to do some user research and to understand what actual real people in the volunteering sector think and want. So I have a Miro board, I have a link. This could all go terribly wrong. We'll find out. So you might get an early tea break, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Yes, thanks, Chris. High risk. So the Open Data Institute. I just want to kind of give you an overview of the ODI because we are not a typical volunteering sector organisation. I want to tell you about who we are, what we believe in, and yeah, a bit about our background. So the ODI was set up, I think, 13 years ago by two of Britain's foremost computer scientists. The first one of those is Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He's best known as the inventor of the web. He basically created the standards that enable the World Wide Web to work. So he created HTML, he created the system for URLs, and he created HTTP. And those are the foundational standards that make the internet work for everybody. Our second founder is Sir Nigel Shadbolt. Nigel is a leading researcher in artificial intelligence. He hasn't just been doing artificial intelligence for the last 3 or 4 years. He's been doing it for decades, his particular interest is around data and AI, and he's particularly interested in how you can use the web to transmit data. The ODI is an independent organisation. We don't get any core funding from government, from research agencies, from organisations, and this enables us to provide challenges to those in positions of authority, be those in business or government. And it also enables us to work across sectors to demonstrate the art of the possible. Our money comes from research grants, it comes from consulting and learning services, and we have partnerships with commercial and philanthropic organisations and a network of members. We're a research institute first and foremost. And that gives us particular responsibilities and particular functions. We've got a really extensive body of knowledge about data and data infrastructure that we use when we're working with clients and public bodies and sectors, and we can bring all of that knowledge to projects. As a not-for-profit, we're a mission-led organisation, and our mission is to build a world where data works for everyone, and to do that by creating an open, trustworthy data ecosystem. As I've said, we work with public and private sectors, and our focus is really on helping organisations build strong, trustworthy infrastructure that supports economic growth, supports public sector service delivery, supports the third sector in delivering outcomes. We kind of think of data infrastructure on a par with the water infrastructure, although hopefully the data is cleaner than the water. We think of it as transport networks, we think about it a bit like an energy system. And we have this belief that actually if you recognise data as infrastructure, it delivers benefit. I think the other thing to say about data infrastructure, because I'm going to use that term a lot, is we use the term data infrastructure really broadly. So when we talk about data infrastructure at ODI, we're talking about the data, the technology that enables that data to be moved and analysed and used, the policies and standards, that control how data is used, and then most importantly, the organisations and people that contribute to data, that steward data, and look after data. So when I talk about data infrastructure, I'm not talking about technology, I'm not talking about tin, I'm talking about all of those things. This is the corporate slide. We have a whole range of services that we provide at ODI. I think the primary thing that we do, as I've already said, is research. We're really interested in new models of data sharing and new models of data stewardship. We're really interested in data in the context of AI. Nigel's provocation is that without data, you can't have AI. You've got to have good quality data as the feedstock for AI. And also evaluating the value of data to organisations and looking at the ethics of data and making sure that data is used fairly. Our research work is funded by a whole range of services that we provide to organisations. So we have training services, we have consultancy services, we have membership services, and we use those services to generate income, which then funds our research. ODI has been a really successful organisation. I've only been around for 3 years, so I can't take credit for all of this, but we've had well over 60,000 people trained through an ODI training programs. ODI was involved in incubating open banking, which is a data sharing initiative in the banking sector, which enables you to see your bank transactions in other apps. So if you use an accounting package, you can pull your bank transactions into that accounting package because of open banking. And there are 7 million users of that in the UK, and it's being rolled out globally now. And I think that's a massive achievement for a small organisation like ODI. We've incubated startups over the years, and those have had an economic value of about 100 million. We're not doing that at the moment. We are starting to incubate data standards, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And we don't just work in the UK. We are a global organisation. We work with some of the biggest brands in the world. We work with organisations. We've worked with organisations like Roche, BBC, Google, the Media Network, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and a whole load of other people. And this slide just has a few of the organisations that ODI has worked in. So I think hopefully what that conveys is that the ODI is a well-regarded, experienced organisation with a strong interest in data infrastructure. Yeah, we need to add some volunteering organisations to this slide. But why are we interested in volunteering? So we have a hypothesis at ODI that there is a fundamental gap in the UK's data infrastructure. And the way that manifests itself is that it's really difficult for people to find out what's happening in their local communities online. And those might not be local communities, they might be other types of communities that people are part of, but it's really hard to find out what's happening in a community online. And some examples of that: how can you find out what's happening in your local community centre? What activities are available in an area for young people to take part in? Where can you get support if you're feeling down? Who can help you learn a new skill or be more physically active? And just thinking about where I am, I'm based in Sheffield. I'm in a suburb of Sheffield, and within 500 metres of my house, there are 4 schools. There's a parish hall. There's a couple of churches. There are shops. There are small Pilates studios, all that sort of stuff. But to actually find out what's happening here is really difficult. You can use Google and you can do searches, but the results that come back aren't great. The information probably exists online, but it's unstructured, it's inconsistent, and it's really often very hard to find. We often cite that it is easier to find a pizza or a curry on the internet than it is to find a swimming session or a football club or a volunteering opportunity. And actually, this lack of shared data makes it harder for people in communities to connect with each other, following that connection theme from Chris's presentation earlier. And there's actually quite strong research that shows that this lack of connection in communities can lead to poorer physical health, poorer mental health, isolation and loneliness, and it can impact on community cohesion. And these things are tangible problems that add costs to the public sector. They reduce people's life chances, and they create our communities are weaker because of this. So that's why we're interested in volunteering. as I said at the start, we like working across sectors and solving big sectoral problems, and we see this community cohesion, this lack of data infrastructure about what's happening in communities as a real challenge. I talked a little bit about physical activity, so just to prove that we've got some chops in this game already. Since 2016, we've been working across the physical activity sector to make data about opportunities to take part in physical activity accessible as open data. I'll talk about open data in a minute. We've been funded by the National Lottery through Sport England to establish a data sharing programme. That programme is called Open Active. There's information about it online, thanks Chris. I think Chris has stacked up these links already. He's very fast. Our work there has led to data about approximately 3.2 million opportunities from around 4,000 providers being available at any one time. The data on physical activity opportunities is actually near real-time data, so it actually fluctuates as swimming sessions become available or tennis courts get booked up. But it seems to settle at about 3.2 million from 4,000 providers. We've got all of the big public leisure providers publishing data. We've got a range of national governing bodies, and we've actually got local sports clubs and local operators publishing data as well. The data that's been opened enables really interesting services. So in London, there is a service called Get Active, which takes the corpus of open active data, filters it down by London Borough, and makes that available to citizens in London. Paralympics GB have built an amazing service called Everybody Moves, which takes all of the open active data, filters it for activities that are accessible, and makes that available through a really accessible user interface. That was actually used in the Paralympics last year as part of the Channel 4 coverage. They pointed people who wanted to be physically active towards Everybody Moves, and actually that saw an uptick in participation from communities that needed accessible sport. And then there are more internal implementations as well. So in Manchester, Manchester Council through MCR Active uses Open Active to aggregate data from lots of different suppliers, because they don't have a single leisure provider, they have lots of providers, but they use Open Active to basically aggregate data into one interface for the public. We also have reference data in Open Active, so we've got a standard structure for describing a physical activity. All of the attributes within that have standardized definitions, but we also have things like a list of physical activity types, and we have a list of physical activity facility types. And that's really important because it enables people who are providing activities to describe them in a consistent way, which makes it easier to find activities. Open Active, importantly, though, also doesn't just provide technology and standards, it provides a vehicle to discuss and agree requirements for standards. So, for example, we know there's a need for improved standardization around sports clubs, and we know that the primary way that people get physically active is by starting to do walking. So we have specifications in development for clubs and for routes. And we've also identified needs to improve definitions around accessibility of activities, and we're working on that at the moment. This slide provides a bit more detail about Open Active for those who are interested after the session today, so I'm not going to talk to it, but I think what I would say is that we know through Open Active that we can fill gaps in the data infrastructure, but we've also become aware that there are other gaps in the data landscape, and while people are working to fill those, there is still quite a lot more to do. And volunteering is an adjacent area where we think we can add real value, bringing the learning from Open Active to a new sector. And actually, volunteering and physical activity really cross over massively, because all of those foundational sports clubs are run by volunteers, right? So how do we use the knowledge that we built up in Open Active to improve the connections between potential volunteers and opportunities to volunteer? How do we, and that is the same challenge that we've had in physical activity, of connecting participants in physical activity to opportunities to be physically active. I'm just going to pause talking about volunteering and sport data and stuff for a minute, because I want to reflect on open data. So open data is a term I've used a few times. And at the ODI, we like to think of data living on a spectrum. At one end of the spectrum, you've got closed data. So this is things like employment contracts, sales reports, locations of military facilities that would never be shared. It's data that is used within an organization in very controlled and very managed ways. And at the other end of the data spectrum, we have open data. And as ODI, we define open data as data that anyone can access, use, or share. And in order for data to be open, it must be available online through the web. It should have a machine-readable format that is easy to access, and it should be openly licensed, and there shouldn't be any limitations on how it can be used. And in the middle, we've got shared data, which is data that is generally controlled through some sort of role-based access control or purpose-based access control. And that would be things like I don't know, medical research, driving licenses, social media data. So we think data lives on this spectrum. With Open Active, we've operated at the open spectrum, open data end of the spectrum. The data about physical activity opportunities is all open data, which means it's all free for anyone to use. And we can see a similar model working quite well in the volunteering sector, and we know there's been a bit of prior work from some organisations to publish open data about volunteering, and that's what we're aiming to do. So this is our hypothesis that we're working towards. Can we transform the volunteer experience by improving data infrastructure? Last autumn, DCMS, who also are involved in Open Active, asked us if we could do something similar to Open Active for volunteering. And their kind of hypothesis that they wanted to work towards was whether they could transform the volunteer experience by improving data infrastructure. Now, being a data infrastructure organisation, of course, our answer was yes. Unfortunately, they didn't just take our answer, they asked us to prove it, or perhaps fortunately. So we undertook a small project last autumn, coming into 2025, to do a little bit of research and to convene a leadership roundtable. The research was quite high level, and I'll just run through some of it now. I don't think there'll be any surprises for people on this call. But we were asked to look at the kind of opportunities that could be supported by having more consistent data about volunteering. And these were the four things that came out. So the first one was actually being able to respond to national emergencies in a more agile way. Being able to quickly tell people how they can help, how they can collaborate, and how they can support the response to national emergencies. And obviously there's a link back to COVID here and how volunteering worked in COVID, or perhaps didn't work in COVID. The second piece, sorry, I've just lost my mouse, give me a second. The second piece was around improving experiences. So actually, there was quite a lot in the research that suggested that volunteers had quite a fragmented experience of volunteering. They had to repeat things when they went to different organisations. There were some inequalities in terms of who was participating in volunteering, and there were some underrepresented communities in the volunteering workforce. We also identified there was a massive opportunity to amplify volunteering through national campaigns by being able to provide those campaigns with consistent data about opportunities to volunteer. And then lastly, we identified there were also some really big opportunities on the horizon around capitalising on emerging technologies like AI. We also found there were some concerns though. So we found that people were quite concerned around the fragmentation of data. The voluntary sector is very complex. There are lots of different volunteer management systems. There are lots of different digital platforms trying to encourage people to volunteer. But there was a kind of common issue amongst them all about connecting with each other and connecting and sharing data with each other. And then there was also a challenge around digital literacy. And we actually found there's quite good research looking at digital literacy. But in that research, there was a particular concern around data literacy. So actually, yeah, digital literacy is one thing, and we need to improve digital literacy. But much more specifically, there were concerns about actually data seems to be becoming more important to organisations, but the pace of development of data skills and capabilities in organisations isn't keeping up. So we brought all of this research to our roundtable. We hosted 30 senior leaders from a really wide range of volunteering system organisations to discuss and test that hypothesis. And we wanted to engage with senior leaders because they're the ones who are empowered to make change happen, and who can drive change in their organisations. We had a really good discussion, and actually there was quite a big consensus that there is significant potential to transform volunteering with data. There was real excitement about the potential to use data as a catalyst for innovation. And there was quite a lot of concern in the room about the potential of AI, not in terms of AI being evil and horrible, but more a concern that the volunteering sector will miss the potential of AI because the data isn't ready for AI. Coming out of the event, these were kind of the three key themes that cropped up. So the first one was about driving innovation to increase impact, making it easier to match volunteers to opportunities, potentially using AI to help with that, being able to personalize experiences for volunteers, and being able to reduce admin burdens for volunteer managers. There was also a theme around developing actionable insights from data. So the data wouldn't just be useful for matching, it would also be useful for understanding provision and impact at national and regional scales. And there was some stuff around actually making data openly available would enable organisations to better market their roles. It would enable partnerships with job centres, social prescribing, incorporating volunteering into school community curriculums, and also potentially making it easier to understand who is volunteering and why. The second one was around enabling data sharing. So there was real concern in the room about the fragmentation of data. There was a really strong signal around organisations having to repeat information, capture information in multiple systems, reducing that kind of top to bottom volunteer journey. I think there was quite a lot of envy of some of the stuff that's happening in other sections with standards. There was quite a lot of discussion about health standards and the way the NHS approaches standards. There was a bit of discussion about Open Active because we talked to them about Open Active a bit. But just actually being able to learn from what other sectors have done was really important, and actually thinking about what data should be made open. And then the last piece was around building a data culture. So actually, how do we make organisations in the voluntary sector curious, collaborative and cooperative around data? I think they were the 3 C's that we came out with. How do we break down barriers between organisations? How do we build trust between organisations that sharing data is the right thing to do? And how do we standardise on data? And we fed all of this back to DCMS as the funder for the work, and we published quite a long blog post, which I think Chris has just posted a link to on the ODI website, summarising the work. So it was really interesting. So whilst everyone in the room agreed there was a need for change and there was an opportunity to make better use of data, actually we haven't really proved that is possible. And DCMS have now asked us to continue our work, and they've commissioned us to rapidly develop, prototype and deliver a new standards-based open data infrastructure for volunteering. We've been commissioned through an open process. We've set out what we think this project should be, and I'm going to try and describe that to you briefly now. We are right at the start of this project. We signed the contract on Friday, so it's quite exciting and it's quite new. But our project goal and our first focus is to make it easier to find volunteering opportunities by enabling the flow of data between services. We want to complement existing digital services. We don't want to replace them, but we want to drive innovation, and we want to build capabilities across the sector. We're planning to co-design, test, and prove the value of data infrastructure for volunteering. We've assembled a really good team to help us do this. So we're going to be working with Team Kinetic, but also with Do It. They're going to support the alpha activities that we're doing. So our plan is to do a very quick discovery, then an alpha, and then a beta, and I'll talk about those a bit in a minute. We're also aiming to work with the Big Help Out in beta. And DCMS are really keen that we work right across the spectrum of volunteering organisations. They want us to work with big national organisations, but also small local volunteering organisations, and perhaps even informal volunteering that goes on in communities. So it's quite a big project. The challenge we've got is that they want us to do it in 6 months. And I think that's tied to the government financial years. But we know what we can do in 6 months. We've got a realistic project plan, and it will be fine. This slide's just got the more detailed project objectives. I think I've just talked to most of these things. So understanding the volunteer ecosystem, thinking about how we can improve participation by improving the discovery and equity of access to data. One thing DCMS are really keen to do is for us to test in the real world. They don't want us to build pilots. They're concerned about, I think, that they have this phrase of pilotitis, you know, always being in pilot. So we're aiming to deliver real impact from day one, or probably day 10. But anyway, so it's an ambitious project. We have 3 phases. The first phase is a discovery phase. We've got 6 weeks, I think, to build a really good understanding of the state of volunteering data in the UK, to identify where data is used currently, how it's collected, stored, and managed, to clarify the key problems, and to assess the variation in data maturity and skills. We then move into a alpha phase, which will run from November to December. In this phase, we're going to design a data standard. We're then going to ask Kinetic and Do It to publish data to that standard, which will give us some data that we can work with. And then we're going to host a hackathon, an event to bring developers together to use that data to see what they can do with it. And that will help us refine the specifications. And then the next phase will be a beta. And in the beta, we will take the most promising use cases and components that we've identified in the alpha and develop those. And our current idea for the beta is that we will provide a source of data that the Big Help Out can use next year if the Big Help Out goes ahead next year. So if everything stacks up and we do all of the things that we want to do, hopefully we'll have a Big Help Out powered by open data that's published through this program. It's really ambitious. We'll see where we get to. So that, I think, is everything I wanted to tell you about the program. We've got about half an hour left in the slot, and I felt it would be really useful, actually, while I've got a group of engaged, excited, experienced volunteer managers, to get your insight to help us push this program in the right direction. So I've got 3 questions for you, and a Miro board. So this is where it could all go horribly wrong, right? So I'll put the link to the Miro board in the chat in a minute. But the 3 questions that I've got for us to think about are: what things do you think we need to be aware of as a new project starting out in the voluntary sector looking at data? And we'll use a pestle analysis for this. So we'll think about political factors, economic factors, social factors, technological factors, legal factors, and environmental factors. And by environment, we mean the operating environment, not the trees and plants and stuff. And I've got some things on Miro to help with that, and I'll talk us through that in a minute. The second question is, how do you describe a volunteering opportunity? So we know from Open Active the basics of how you describe an opportunity, but what's special about volunteering? What do we need to think about when we're writing a standard to help people describe a volunteering opportunity? And then I think the third question is, how can our project help you? What can we, thanks Chris, you've put the link in before me, well done. How can we actually help you? What is it you need from us as a data project in the voluntary sector? So those are the things that I want to talk about. I'm going to switch the screen sharing to the Miro board, because then I can talk you through it. Just give me a second. So the link to this board is in the meeting chat. To get into it, you should just need to click the link and you should be in the chat, in the board immediately. You shouldn't need to log in.
I may have typed it wrong, Andrew. My fat fingers may have got that one wrong. If you want to repost it.
Okay, I will. Yeah, I've reposted it. I can see people arriving. So you shouldn't need to log in. It will work in Edge or Chrome or modern browsers. It's not very good on a mobile phone. It's probably all right on a tablet. You can see we've got 7 people in. I'll just keep waffling about Miro. Miro is a really simple whiteboarding tool. You can ignore everything on the left-hand side where there's kind of text and pens and stuff. Everything you need is already on the board. And I can do clever things like I can move you around so that you're looking at the same view as me, but I will warn you when I do that. So for example, bring everyone to me. So now everyone should be able to see exactly what I can see on the screen. So our first task, and I'm going to give us about 7 minutes for this, is to think about those factors that could affect the project. So I've got on the board, I've got 6 canvases, one for political factors, one for economic factors, one for social, one for technical, legal and environmental. And there are stacks of post-it notes next to those. There's green ones for things that people think are opportunities, red ones for things that people think are threats, and yellow ones for things that people think of that don't fall into those 2 categories neatly. So you can just pick up a post-it note and drag it onto the board and write on it. So I'm going to set a 7-minute timer, and I can do that with the tool. And I'm going to let you spend 7 minutes thinking about opportunities, threats, and other things in these categories for the project that I've just described to you. I think I should have also said there are no wrong answers here. So actually, if you've got a thought or an idea, stick it down on the board. Also, it's anonymous unless you have logged into Miro, so don't be worried about that too much. And in terms of how we will use this data, we won't attribute anything to any individuals, but we will use this because it will give it to give us a sense of the things that we need to think about as a project, the risks and issues that we face. If you haven't managed to get into the board, I'm quite happy to copy and paste stuff out of the Google Meet chat onto the board, so I can help with that if you haven't managed to get into the Miro board. So you're doing really well. It's good to see stuff appearing on the board. I guess if you're wanting inspiration, I asked Gemini what good questions were to ask a group of volunteer managers earlier when doing a pestle analysis. Gemini did a pretty good job, I think. Gemini is Google's AI. It said things like, which of these pestle factors pose the greatest immediate risk or opportunity? Are there any emerging trends within the political or technological landscape we haven't considered? How might you change social attitudes towards our product or service? Are there any ethical considerations or cultural nuances specific to the target market? What legal or regulatory changes are on the horizon that could affect our operations in the next 3 years? I thought that was ambitious because I had told Gemini it was a 6-month project, but it clearly likes to think ahead. And are there any things like broader economic downturns or changes in regulation that could impact on us? So that was kind of the questions that Gemini thought we should be thinking about in this. Yeah, I can see the mice are slowing down a little bit, which is a sign often that creative juices are ebbing. I'm going to start talking through some of these because I think most people have stopped moving around. So I think I'm going to start with political. So I think there are a nice set of issues that people have written down in terms of the political there. I think people are right. There is a real opportunity around leadership here, and a real opportunity about better insight, and a real opportunity about engaging with local volunteering centres. I think, yes, GDPR is a concern. I think we need to think about how we manage personal data in this context. I think the reason we're starting with volunteer opportunities is because theoretically there is very little personal data involved in that. But we do know from the work on Open Active that sometimes personal data does sneak in. So we will think about how we manage that. I think the point about Scotland and Scottish charities versus English and Welsh charities is interesting. Because the work is DCMS funded, our primary focus is on England, but we want to create a data standard that would work internationally, because that makes most sense. This isn't just a UK problem. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to deal with that. Is there anything on there that section that anyone wants to raise or discuss? Okay, cool. Let's have a look at economic. Yeah, so I think there's this challenge, isn't there, about the volume of applications for grants, jobs that AI can generate. And I've just been recruiting, and we've had a huge amount of applications, and I think it's because people just use AI to submit them really rapidly. And I know from applying for grants that it's exactly the same. So I don't know if we can solve that with this project, but it's certainly something to be aware of. I think there's this point about big and small charities. I think that's really interesting. DCMS have been really clear that we need to come up with something that works with smaller charities, and I don't know the answer to how we do that at the moment, but I think there's definitely something we're going to have to reflect on. Yeah, data poverty is a really interesting issue. I think we've got quite a lot of work to do to increase capabilities, to increase skills, but also to increase the richness of data that exists. So from Open Active, we know that most data about physical activity is in the least deprived areas. And actually, when you look at the objectives that Sport England have, we would like it to be the most data to be in the most deprived areas. It's a difficult one, but we will work towards dealing with that. On the social, yeah, I think that making connections easier is really important. I think there's a question there about which charities and organisations we're connecting with. We've got a very long list of organisations to talk to, and as I said, we are 5 days in, so you will be hearing from us. Yeah, I think how we deal with AI bias is really interesting. We've been asked to look at how we can enable data to be used more effectively in AI-driven search. So, when you used to search, you used to get a list of results. Well, now search is more like you get an answer. And so how do we make sure that the right answer is coming through in those search results? In terms of environmental, yeah, we're very aware of the issues around the volunteer population, about it aging, about decreasing numbers of regular volunteers. And I think fundamentally that's why DCMS is so interested in making it easier to find consistent information about volunteering consistent data about opportunities to volunteer, because they want to try and address that challenge. Political, yeah, I thought GDPR would come up. Data ownership is definitely something we need to think about. Data sharing agreements is something that we probably need to consider in a bit more detail. And then lastly, technological. Yeah, so the skill gap. But conversely to that, yeah, you're right, there's an opportunity for IT training and development for charity workers. Opportunity to take advantage of new AI developments, and access to more tech to support volunteering, and actually making that tech work interoperably with other volunteering tech, I think, is something that we want to achieve. So thank you for that. That's really helpful. There's a lot of insight in there that we will bring into the project. The second thing that I wanted to do was think a little bit about how to describe a volunteering opportunity. So we have some thoughts on this already based on our work on Open Active, but actually, what does a well-described volunteering opportunity look like? When you're describing a volunteering opportunity, what information would you find most valuable? So that's part 2. And then part 3 is, how can our project help you? So actually, this is a real opportunity to drive change. What do we need to provide to your organisation to help you? And we can use, the preference here would be to use a user story model. So to say, as a volunteer manager, I want to do X, Y, and Z so that something great happens. But actually, if you want to write that, you'll express yourself differently, that's also fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start another 7-minute timer. And if you could work on that point about how you describe a volunteering opportunity and how your project team can help, that would be awesome. Thank you. So in terms of describing a volunteering opportunity, I think it's thinking about things like, how do you describe the practicalities? Things like the time commitment, the frequency, the duration, the location. How do you describe the skills that people have? Are there existing methods for doing that we should look at? Are there ways that you describe the impact of an opportunity at the moment? what barriers and frustrations do you see when looking for volunteering, or when feedback you get from people who are looking for volunteering opportunities? How do people like to be recognised for the volunteering that they're doing? And I think we're about halfway through the time, so we haven't got very many stories on how the project could help. So if people would like to start doing that, that would be great. So I think here we're looking at actually, what does success look like for you? What frustrations or challenges do you want us to try and address? How would you use the data that we're unlocking in this project? Are you interested in transactional services? Are you interested in analytical services? What's the one thing that if we could solve would make the biggest difference to you? And we've got about 2 minutes left, I think. So I'm just, I was just having a look at the describing volunteer opportunities section, and it's absolutely amazing. I think there is lots of intelligence that we can build into our models based on that input. I think what's one thing that's really important to emphasize is that we don't want to create a standard that isn't going to be practical and workable for people in the sector. We want to create a standard that works for the sector. And to do that, we're going to try and we are going to take an open approach to the work that we do. So we will develop our standards in the public. We will run a standards working group, which will be an open group that anyone can come to contribute to the development of the standards. But you really see our role as a technical facilitator, an editor, a drafts person who building the things that you need. So we want this to be an open, collaborative process. I don't think I'll have time to read the user stories, but I will look at those after the session. I think that they're really helpful to us because this is primary information. It's not supposition. So thank you for contributing to those as well. The Miro board will be open after the session. We will keep that available. But just in the last 8 minutes or so, I just wanted to give people an opportunity to ask any questions that they might have. Chris, can you see anything in chat?
There's a couple of conversations that sort of kicked off. There's Keith was talking about the AI opportunity and what that starts to look like in terms of understanding the personal data that may be required to drive an AI to be able to make matches on behalf of a volunteer. Have I understood that, Keith? If you want to ask the question yourself.
Yeah, it's just almost having a volunteer assistant, isn't it? In terms of, so I'd probably look at this twofold. One as a guide for possible volunteers going through that application process, looking around opportunities. That would be a really useful tool, I guess, because it answers any questions they may have. But the opposite side also is then go through that automated process that can be automated. I'm always a little bit conscious because I think some decisions need almost that human approach where we have to be a little bit more weighted in making decisions for those potential volunteers. DBS is a big example of that, isn't it? And if there are disclosures or anything to declare, we have to take some kind of view on that, and that's something that probably wouldn't be feeling comfortable having AI do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Risk assessment, isn't it?
It is, and whilst the project is primarily focusing on opportunities, because we think that is the primary use case that we've been asked to look at. We do have a technology for securely sharing personal data at ODI, and we've offered to do a pilot of using that technology to enable the transfer of information about volunteers between systems. So it will be a small, short, sharp piece of work, but hopefully it will show how we can solve some of those passporting problems using more modern technologies. And I know that's been looked at by lots of people lots of times in the past, but I think we've got a slightly different opportunity because of where the technology is. But I agree.
For you, Andrew, if that's all right. So
yeah,
Abby,
sure, yes.
Abby's asked, how can she find out more information about the development of this program? Going back to a question before from Wendy about maybe potentially being involved or being able to advertise the hackathon.
Yeah, so we are just doing our comms planning at the moment. We will probably be on, so it's just very early days. I'm fairly sure we will be on LinkedIn. There will be some information on the ODI website. And as we start developing standards, we will probably build a microsite for that. And as that develops, we will share links with people through channels that we've got. In terms of participating in the hackathon, we will put a fairly wide call out for participants. That's going to happen in the next month or so, with the aims of running that in December, possibly January, because the project timeline's a bit fluid at the moment. But yeah, we will be making noise. You will find us.
Or anybody that's a Team Kinetic customer, obviously with us being involved in this project, we will be letting people know. And anybody that's a member of the community of practice will also be using that as a channel to share information about what's going on and how you get involved in it. So there's a few ways, hopefully, that everybody on this call will find out what's happening and get an opportunity to feed into it. I've got another question here from Joanna. Are you engaging with organisations to support people who experience barriers to volunteering to understand their perspective?
That's a really interesting question. If there are organisations that you know of that we could talk to, we will definitely talk to them. I think we've learned from Open Active that it's really important to consider the accessibility of opportunities, and we've built quite a good relationship with Paralympics GB, and we work with their lived experience advisory board. And yeah, it'd be good to do the same with this.
Yeah, we've got a few people, Andrew. I'll add them to our little list of contacts.
Awesome, thanks, Chris.
Have a look. Got a question from Chris. AI could help potential volunteers consider or imagine the ideas they could offer. Chris, do you want to just come on and explain what you mean with that one?
Hi, yeah, I was just thinking it's a bit like, I suppose it is a bit like a personal assistant, isn't it? My microphone's over here. It's a bit like a personal assistant. You could have an AI sits beside you as an applicant on a form. Instead of saying these are the opportunities for you to apply for, it could on one level say, well, what kind of things are you interested in? I like dogs and whatever it might be, and find something that suits. Equally, it might actually say, so you're interested in wildlife in your local community and you want to do things in the evening. Have you thought about creating an opportunity that looks like X, Y, and Z,
yeah,
and then partnering either with other people or with an organisation to
supply rather than demand is what we're thinking for that one.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's kind of almost a reverse search, isn't it? Yeah, I quite like that.
We've been thinking about how we get ready for things like agentic AI, and that kind of approach maybe fits that model where you have a set of predefined preferences and abilities and skills that then organizations can ask for, as opposed to them requesting you. So there's an opportunity for a two-way market if
Yeah.
But it's a bit counterintuitive to the way the market works now. So it's a bit of a change of paradigm, I think, for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an interesting one.
It is, and I think on the board I saw that there was a comment about kind of monetizing data as a risk, but also as an opportunity. And I think there's something to balance there as well. Is the value in the data, or is the value in the expertise in how to use the data? I think that's something we often discuss with people at ODI. So I think I'm basically out of time, aren't I, Chris?
You are, yeah, we're there. Thank you, Andrew.
I think if you want to find out more, my email address is on the end of the slides. If you want to learn about the ODI, we're at theodi.org.